everybody, Mark, aka the Nerdy Punk, back at you again tonight for a new video. Cheers, everybody. So if you're wondering about the attire for tonight's video, it is a night of celebration. I am celebrating, my opinion, the best films of 2021 with my top 10 movies of 2021 list. So I figure we need to spruce it up a little bit to talk about the best films of the year. So, like I said, I want to go through my top 10 list tonight. I've been kind of pushing this video off a little bit because I'm trying to catch up on some movies that I missed back in 2021, and I've done that to a relative extent. There's still a few movies that I want to watch, but I didn't necessarily think they would be like really high on the list, and so I just decided to go ahead, get this video out there, and give you guys my thoughts on the best that cinema had to offer us in 2021. So like I said, this will be a top 10 list, but I also have 5 honorable mentions this year, and so I'm going to go ahead and get rolling with the honorable mentions. I will go ahead and throw up the movie poster for each film as we go along, so you guys can kind of keep track and get an idea. If you happen to miss the film completely, you get an idea of what it's all about, how it looked, all that stuff. All right, starting in with my first honorable mention, we have Candyman, directed by Nia DaCosta. And I will try to give you guys an idea of who directed each film as we go as well. So this was the reboot of the Candyman horror series that came out this year. It was a movie that got delayed, I think, a couple times. Several of these movies were delayed because, of course, COVID hit everything in 2020. But this was one of the first, I think, in 2020 to be delayed. Anyway, I really thought that this was a beautiful reimagining of the film. It was so gorgeous cinematography-wise, set in Chicago, and it was just beautifully shot. Like, some of the exterior shots were amazing, really showed off the beautifulness of that city that is not oftentimes explored on film, and I really love that. I love the performances. Yahya Abdul-Mateen II, amazing. I can't wait to see more from that guy. Yeah, I really enjoyed this reboot, and in fact, I actually didn't watch the original until the day after I watched the reboot, and I liked the reboot more. I know, please don't kill me for that. Okay, number 14, or my second honorable mention, is Roadrunner, directed by Morgan Neville. Now, this is a documentary about Anthony Bourdain, and I was a fan of Anthony Bourdain's work as a, travel, I don't know, what do you even call that career? Like, he had travel shows, of course, that everybody knows about. He was a chef, so he explored food around the world. I really liked that aspect of his work as well. And of course, when he passed away, that was a shock to everybody. And this was a really good kind of in-depth look at his life that I thought was relatively tasteful, considering the way that he passed away and the kind of publicity of his life. I thought it was relatively tasteful. There's a couple things that I really didn't like that was in the movie, but it was one of the best documentaries of the year, and it was one of the few documentaries I actually got to see in theaters. So really enjoyed that one. Third honorable mention is West Side Story, directed by Steven Spielberg. And at one point this was in the top 10, and then it kind of got cut down as I watched more movies. I think this is just as good, if not better, than the original from 1957, I think, or maybe a little bit after. Not 100% sure on the original release date of that film, but I thought some things were updated that needed to be updated, but then I thought some things weren't updated that should have been updated. So I think the biggest pros of this movie are the direction. I mean, for, Spielberg having never directed a musical before, he knocked it out of the park with this, and it was fantastic direction-wise, looked beautiful. The songs were really good, even though they weren't necessarily my cup of tea. I really enjoyed this. There were a couple things that really held it back for me. A couple things in terms of believability. I thought the scene in the church between Tony and Maria was just so ludicrous and ridiculous. And then the scene after the rumble, also between Tony and Maria, I thought was ridiculous and ludicrous. But, you know, despite those couple things kind of holding it back, it was a really beautiful film, and it looked fantastic, and some kind of surprise in terms of the performances as well. I don't think they were as amazing as many people have thought they were. Like, I don't think Rachel Zegler necessarily deserved an Academy Award, or not an Academy Award. She'll probably get nominated, but a Golden Globe. I believe she won the Golden Globe. I don't necessarily think that her performance rose to that level, but it was good, and especially for a first-time actress, that's incredible. So, West Side Story, I enjoyed it, but it's just not top 10 material in my opinion. Number 12 is The French Dispatch, directed by Wes Anderson. This is probably the most Wes Anderson film of all of his filmography. This is so specifically crafted in his style, like you couldn't mistake it for anything else. Because this movie is an anthology, I feel like it's actually kind of a spin on an anthology. It's a different take on an anthology. But it suffers from the same problems that all anthologies do, and the fact that some segments of the story are better than others. But overall, I found this film very enjoyable. Does it have a ton of crossover appeal? Probably not. So if you're not a Wes Anderson fan already, I don't think this is the movie that's going to convert you. But if you already like Wes Anderson stuff, definitely give this one a watch if you didn't check it out in the theaters or on home video since its release. Number 11, I have Belfast, directed by Kenneth Branagh. This film, it's had an interesting kind of award season. Early on in the award seasons in December, people were saying this is going to win Best Picture, like this is the front runner, this is, you know, the film to beat. And it's kind of gone down a little bit since, but it's still pretty high, ranking up there. I really loved the film. That's why it's an honorable mention for my top 10 of the year, but it didn't make the top 10 for very specific reasons. I feel like there's a couple things holding it back performance-wise, and I don't necessarily that's the fault of the actors at all. Like, the main one that I had the biggest complaints with was Judi Dench. I liked Judi Dench's performance, but I just don't think there was enough there for her to be a standout, and I think that's the fault of the writing and not necessarily her performance. A lot of this film just felt very kind of surface level, like it didn't go as deep as I wanted it to, and it's a pretty short watch as well, which maybe it didn't have time to expand upon it. I understand what the film was going for in viewing these kind of political, tumultuous times through the eyes of a child, and kind of how a child would interpret these types of things. I think that was really good, and I appreciated the film for that. I just feel like it didn't get quite as deep because of that, and it didn't hit home with me quite as much as I wanted it to. That being said, one of the biggest pluses of this movie is Van Morrison's music, which is used heavily in the film, and Van Morrison actually is from Northern Ireland, which I didn't realize. I didn't really know much about Van Morrison heading into this. And this movie made me a Van Morrison fan. So that's a big notch in the plus department for Belfast. Okay, we're officially into the top 10 now. My number 10 pick is The Last Duel, directed by Ridley Scott. This is one of two Ridley Scott movies that came out this year, the other being House of Gucci. I watched both of them. House of Gucci does not appear on this list. It had way too many flaws, in my opinion, to appear on this list. But The Last Duel is such an interesting, kind of refreshing, different movie. Different from what we see on the screen these days, and even different from what we saw on the screen back in the day. So this film notoriously flopped at the box office, lost about $70 million, which I think is a travesty. I think this movie is one of the most unique things to come out this year and should have been highly praised. And I think it did well with critics, it just didn't make any money. There's a lot of reasons for that. It's not just like millennials and their smartphones, which is what Ridley Scott said. That plays a factor into it because this movie is a slow burn, And I think one of the most devastating parts of technology addiction is that it has shortened our attention span so much. And so, younger people tend to have a harder time getting into movies like this. But this is a big budget, medieval film, period piece, that you just really don't see a whole lot of anymore with this type of money behind it. And while that part of it is refreshing, that it's something different, it's also not like anything I've ever seen before in this type of genre, in the sense that it really focuses heavily on women's issues and how women were treated in medieval society. I also read a lot of negative articles about this film from all kinds of websites all across the political spectrum, saying how this movie was sexist and how it was about men, playing these childish games, fighting it out, when the woman is the one who suffered in this type of situation. And I feel like these people either didn't see the film or didn't understand the film, because it's not presenting that in a positive light. Yes, the film is about a woman who suffers a sexual assault, and two men fight to the death because of it. But it doesn't portray that positively at all. It portrays it as, look at how stupid and ridiculous this was, and how harmful this was. And it really points out so many key issues that we don't think about when we're watching movies like, I don't know, Gladiator, which maybe not be the best example because it's a really good film in that kind of world, but also by Ridley Scott. You don't see a whole lot of older films like that are based in these, historical eras. You don't see them approach things from different perspectives all that often. And that's another thing very remarkable about this film, is that it's, of course, a famous 3-act structure in which we hear the same events retold from different perspectives. And I think that was also executed very well. That could have gone poorly. That could have been boring and seemed redundant, but I don't think it did. I think it nailed it perfectly. So The Last Duel is my number 10. If you, like many other people, didn't get a chance to check this one out yet, please go watch it. It's not necessarily the best film I've ever seen, but it is really, really underrated, in my opinion. Coming in at number 9 is Spider-Man No Way Home, directed by John Watts. This is the movie that everyone's been talking about for the past month and a half. I had a strange encounter trying to watch this movie. So the weekend it came out, December 17th, I did not see this movie. I saw another movie that's going to be on my list later, because I was frankly more excited for that. But again, I think it's a better movie. But because I didn't watch it, and then I went on vacation with my family, still didn't watch it, came back from Christmas, I was exposed to COVID over Christmas, so I went 3 weeks without watching this movie. Somehow I avoided most spoilers, which was remarkable. And then the day that I finally did watch this movie, I had to drive through an ice storm. So I had to drive like 30 miles an hour on the highway. It was nuts and insane. But I finally watched Spider-Man No Way Home, and you know what? The theater was still packed 3 weeks later. So this movie is making so much money and so much attention for good reason. I think it's definitely the best of John Watts' 3 Spider-Man movies till this point. It's the best of Tom Holland's Spider-Man movies. Do I think it's the best movie ever? No, absolutely not. I don't even think it's even close to the best of the year, but it does make my top 10 list because I did really enjoy it, and to me, it was fan service done right. So Spider-Man No Way Home is number 9. Coming in at number 8 is Malignant, directed by James Wan. This was one of my favorite theater experiences of the year. I got the opportunity to watch this all by myself in the theater, which was an incredibly creepy and fun experience. I really enjoyed it, very immersive. But this movie, if you're amongst the horror fans, has been pretty widely discussed this year. It's kind of flying under the radar for like general audiences, but horror fans are loving this, and for good reason. The twist, fantastic. the inspiration of kind of older horror genres like giallo and some other kind of 80s stuff thrown in there. I thought it was fantastic. It's just a nice, fun little horror movie that feels like something that would have been on the shelves of a rental store back in the 80s or the 90s. And I just love that. I think it's one of James Wan's best, and in a career where he's had multiple masterpieces, in my opinion. My number 7 pick is another James. This is James Gunn with The Suicide Squad. I believe this is my favorite. Yep, this is my favorite straight-up comic book movie of the year. Another great theater experience. Don't know why this one didn't make more money at the box office. It should have. But this was so funny, interesting, engaging, a million times better than 2016's Suicide Squad. I just loved this film. I loved how they went for it. They didn't shy away from an R rating. They really went in on the dark humor, which I find so enjoyable. So, The Suicide Squad, my favorite comic book movie of the year. My number 6 pick is The Humans, which was directed by Stephen Karam, based on a play of the same name, also directed by Stephen Karam. So the guy who made the stage play also directed the film adaptation, which is interesting. You don't see that all that often. This one I watched when it came out back in November. This is an underrated gem, in my opinion. A very dialogue-driven film. I said back at the time when I reviewed it, it's like a horror movie. That's not a horror movie. It's not a straight-up horror movie, but it's based on the horrors that humans cause ourselves. And just, it's really about a family self-destructing over a Thanksgiving holiday. But in the end, it doesn't feel completely hopeless. So it's not like a 100%, like disaster fest. It's a really heartwarming story about all the types of things that humans get involved in. And I love the emotions explored. I thought the performances were fantastic. Richard Jenkins really stands out, and he's one of my favorite actors of all time. So I really adored this movie, and not enough people watched it. So if you happen to get a chance to check this one out, definitely recommend it. Need a quick break to refresh my palate. Cheers, everybody. Number 5 is No Time to Die, the last Daniel Craig era James Bond film. I adore Daniel Craig, one of my top 5 favorite actors of all time, and it's very bittersweet to see his time as Bond coming to an end. This was the first time that I was able to see a Bond film in theaters on opening night, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a fitting end to his time as the character. I don't think it's his best effort as James Bond. Right now, I would put it probably at number 3, below Casino Royale and Skyfall. But I think it was a very solid film, very good, and kind of a more underrated part of the film was Ana de Armas, who, her segment in the film was fantastic. Like, I would love to just watch an entire TV series based around her character from this movie. I thought it was great. So, No Time to Die comes in at number 5. My number 4 pick is Nightmare Alley, directed by Guillermo del Toro. When I first saw this, I think this was my number 1, and then I've actually had several number 1s this year, because I think there have been so many phenomenal movies that have come out, but none that have, like, separated themselves until very recently as my clear-cut number 1. I was going back and forth this year a lot, and Nightmare Alley was one of them in contention for a long time. I really wish this film would get more awards buzz. I think it's kind of fallen out of favor since its release, because it's kind of been, I don't know if divisive is the right word, but audiences are kind of mixed in terms of their response to it. It's, a neo-noir film. It's a type of film that you don't see all that often anymore. It's a psychological thriller. It's kind of a slow burn. but I really enjoyed it for all of those reasons. There's a couple minor things that kind of prevent it from being a perfect movie, in my opinion, but it is a fantastic exploration of greed, ego, um, heartbreak, all that type of stuff wrapped into a nice, creepy little package. And still, in my opinion, probably the best ending of the year. So, Nightmare Alley is number 4. My number 3 pick is Don't Look Up, directed by Adam McKay. This movie, on the other hand, everybody has been talking about. I mean, you cannot escape this movie on social media for a good reason. I think this movie perfectly holds up a mirror to society and says, hey, look at what humans do. The good, the bad, the ugly. How we are corrupted by social media, by news media, our, just kind of one note responses to things, our 20-second attention spans. It's got it all in there, and it's, despite it being very depressing in certain instances, it's also incredibly funny in certain instances, and I love the way they balance those two sides. Just a couple minor issues, most of them in this film relating to Jennifer Lawrence's character for me, but if not for that, this would be a perfect movie, in my opinion. I think it's one of the most important movies of the year, just in the social commentary and the satire that it's trying to bring up and the types of discussions it's trying to bring up. So, I love Don't Look Up. I understand if certain people didn't like it, but I loved it, and I think it deserves all the praise and attention that it's getting. My number 2 pick is Dune, directed by Denis Villeneuve. Wow. This movie. This was an incredible experience. I missed out on this in the theaters, unfortunately. So my first watch was actually Wednesday, I think, a few days ago. So it's still pretty fresh in my mind, but I felt comfortable putting this as number 2 because it wasn't my number 1. It didn't rise to that level, but it was incredible. And so I was perfectly comfortable with putting it at this spot. The only thing that I didn't like about this movie is that it does feel so incomplete. It is the first part of a 2-part film series from Villeneuve adapting the novel. So it's only the first half of the novel. It's designed to be incomplete. But because it's incomplete, I feel like I cannot judge it yet. I have to see the second part, and we aren't going to get that until 2023 at the earliest. So that's the only thing holding it back. It was stunning visually, so beautiful. Hans Zimmer's score, amazing. Timothée Chalamet, I thought, was fantastic in the lead role. I loved pretty much everything about this movie, other than the fact that we didn't get all of it at once. So Dune is my number 2 pick. And now, the moment that we have all been waiting for, my number 1 movie of 2021 is Teton, directed by Julia Ducournau. Like I said, I was going back and forth so many times on my number 1 pick, and then I watched Teton, and it eventually stole that throne and that trophy. This movie, it's such a wild ride. I watched it initially because I heard it was very shocking, and I heard there was a lot of shocking imagery and subject matter, and I heard it compared a lot to David Cronenberg's work, which I really fell in love with this year and last. I've become a massive fan of Cronenberg, and there is that body horror element to this film that I think is important, and I think is very interesting, to say the least. But where this film excels is at relationship building, character development, and just a statement on love and human connection that I think is the best of the year by far. The emotions that this film makes you feel, the way it takes you down this road is completely unexpected. Like, when it started exploring this relationship at the center of the movie, I thought, well, this is just going to be a minor character and then we're going to move on to more crazy shit. And it didn't. It just kept lingering and lingering and lingering. And then I kind of got what the film was about. It's really about unconditional love in every sense of the word, and how people seek it out, how people find it in sometimes the most unusual places. Maybe not as unusual as the situation going on in the film, but such a great part of the human experience. And it is the most wholesome movie that is also horrifying at the same time. Like, the first half of this movie feels very different from the second half, but there's so much shocking stuff that you see in that first half of the movie. And then, I mean, it doesn't get less shocking, but it gets more wholesome and more, it just makes you feel kind of strangely warm and fuzzy inside. Like, it is really a beautiful film. There's also a great commentary on gender identity buried deep within this film as well, that I think if you're somebody who's ever dealt with that, you will get a lot out of the film as well, I think. So, I'm gonna have to revisit this movie. I've only seen it once. It's not quite perfect in my opinion. There's a few things that hold it back, but it is definitely my favorite experience with a movie in 2021. This did win the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival. It is a French film, but even if you don't like traditionally watching films with subtitles, please, please, please check this movie out. I do not think you will be disappointed. I mean, at the very least, you will not be bored for 2 hours. That I can tell you. Julia Ducournau is absolutely somebody that I am going to be watching. Every time she puts a film out, I'm going to be there as soon as I can possibly be there to watch one of her new movies from this point forward. Alright, that is my top 10 list of films of 2021. Go ahead and let me know in the comments down below what your favorite movies of the year were. I thought this was overall a pretty great year for films. I think it was better than 2020, and certainly the fact that we've had movie theaters open pretty much all year in every part of the country and world. I think that already made it a much better year for movies than 2020. But I think overall, just the quality of films that we were able to get our hands on this year was better, and I'm hoping for an incredible 2022. Every day I feel like I read about another movie from either a director that I love or a plot that just sounds insane, and I get super, super excited. So I'm hoping for a really great 2022, and hopefully the best year of the decade so far is coming. But 2021 was pretty great. Like I said, let me know in the comments down below your favorite movie of the year, or your favorite movies if you don't have just one. And stay tuned for more content this year. See you guys. Have a great weekend.